My ex-boyfriend invited me to his wedding to flaunt his wealthy fiancée. But my plus one turned the tables in the most unexpected way. Jake, 31 meters, and I, 23F, met when we both worked part-time at a bookstore. I was still in college back then, saving up to move into my own place, while he was struggling to pay off his student loans. His parents were in deep financial trouble due to bad investments, so he had little support from them. At first, we bonded over shared struggles, but as time passed, we realized that we genuinely loved spending time together. After graduating 2 years later, I had enough savings to finally move out. Jake, on the other hand, was still drowning in debt and couldn't afford to leave his parents' house. I offered him a place to stay with me, but since his finances were tight, he couldn't contribute much. I agreed to cover 80% of the rent while he only had to handle 20%, and he eagerly accepted. Aside from rent, we split the utility bills evenly. Though we had different jobs, Jake's work required him to be on site for long shifts, while I had a corporate role with more flexibility. My boss didn't mind where I worked as long as I met my deadlines each month. Because of Jake's work schedule, he rarely helped out at home, leaving most chores to me. I handled the cooking, cleaning, laundry, and dishes. I didn't mind at first since I knew his job was demanding, but I did ask him to take out the trash since he was always the last to eat. Unfortunately, Jake kept forgetting, leaving me to take it out every morning. One weekend, I had to go into the office for a big project. When I returned, our place was a disaster. The kitchen counter was covered in dirty dishes, empty snack bags, and used coffee cups. The laundry was untouched, and the trash was overflowing. I was beyond exhausted, but I couldn't rest with the mess around me. I spent hours cleaning up, hoping Jake would at least notice my effort. When he came home, he hugged me and said he missed me, but didn't acknowledge the clean house. He flopped onto the couch to watch TV, leaving me feeling invisible. I couldn't hold back my tears. I didn't know if it was the exhaustion, the frustration, or the lack of appreciation. But I suddenly realized how little he valued me. He glanced at me and asked if something was wrong, but I just shook my head and said I was heading to bed. Before going upstairs, I reminded him once again about the trash. He nodded, but as expected, the next morning, the trash was still there. When he came into the kitchen and asked for breakfast, I snapped. I told him he could cook for himself. He called me rude, and that's when I lost it. I yelled about how he never helped with anything, and he just blinked at me like I was overreacting. I took a deep breath and asked why he never took out the trash. He shrugged and said he forgot. I asked him what he actually did around the house, besides sitting in front of the TV with a beer. He argued that he worked hard and deserved his time to relax. I nodded and agreed but asked, "What about me?" I reminded him that after work, I came home and cooked for both of us, cleaned the apartment, did laundry, ironed his shirts, and the only thing I ever asked was for him to take out the trash. His response? That he never asked me to do any of it. He claimed that since he had a demanding job, as his girlfriend, I should understand and support him. He even justified it by saying his mother did everything for his father. That was my breaking point. I realized I had been working so hard, yet letting him take advantage of me. And we weren't even married. I looked him in the eye and told him I was done. I wasn't his mother, and we were equals. I told him he needed to start cooking his own food, doing his own laundry, ironing his own shirts, and cleaning up after himself. Jake's eyes widened in shock, and he tried to argue, but I raised a hand to stop him. I told him that there was more to it. He needed to pay half the rent or move out. Jake was shocked and asked me where this was coming from. I explained that I was tired of working so hard for us and not feeling appreciated. He clearly wanted to say more, but I walked out of the apartment since I was running late for work. It was the first time in my life I had set such firm boundaries, but I didn't feel guilty. I kept my word and only cleaned up after myself, doing nothing extra. It felt satisfying to watch him scramble around the apartment, looking for clean clothes or ironing his shirts before heading to work. He didn't clean the kitchen or take out the trash, hoping I would do it, but I refused. Even when the dishes started to pile up and smell, I simply decided to eat out so I wouldn't have to go near the kitchen. Jake tried to talk to me several times, insisting I should be a better partner and take care of him, but I stood firm. not giving in to his demands. When it came time to pay the rent, I gave 50% to our landlord and told her that Jake would be covering the rest. He tried to come back and argue with me, demanding I pay the 80% like before, but I refused. I reminded him that he never appreciated me when I did that, so I was done helping. He tried to make excuses, but in the end, he had no choice but to pay his share of the rent. Through all this, he never once apologized to me or acknowledged the effort I had put in around the house. He didn't sit down and express any regret for taking me for granted. It was disappointing, and looking back, I regret not seeing him for who he truly was sooner. As you might guess, the tension grew between us. Over the following months, our fights became worse, with him blaming me for everything and trying to gaslight me into going back to my old ways. I got a promotion at work, and that seemed to be the final straw for Jake. One of our mutual friends, who was also my co-worker, must have told him about it, because that night was the worst fight we had. Jake came home drunk and woke me up, yelling that he needed to talk. He had a hangover from celebrating with my friends, so I asked him if we could talk tomorrow. But he kept insisting he needed to say something important. Groggy and annoyed, I sat up in bed just to get him to stop. I asked what was so important that he had to wake me up in the middle of the night. This is when Jake, slurring his words, told me how he had met someone at work. I knew who he was talking about because I had seen her at one of his office parties. Her name was Lily, and she was only 25. She came from a wealthy family, and the only reason she even worked was because her father insisted on it. Jake went on to say how he was falling in love with her because, according to him, she was a real woman, unlike me. I stared at him, completely emotionless. I didn't care or feel hurt, as I thought I would. I knew our relationship was practically over anyway. He kept talking about his feelings for her, but I stopped him mid-sentence. I told Jake that, honestly, I didn't care if he was seeing someone else, and that I was happy for him. I suggested we break up amicably, and he could move out of the apartment as soon as possible. Jake looked at me, his brow furrowed, and asked if I was jealous of Lily. I smiled and shook my head, telling him that I was glad he found someone, because now I wouldn't feel guilty about ending things. Jake became furious and his face turned red. He asked if my new promotion had given me the confidence to say that. I told him that my promotion had nothing to do with our relationship. I had realized over the past few months that we were no longer compatible. We were more like roommates than romantic partners, and I understood why he wanted to see someone else. I thought Jake would be relieved to hear me say this, but instead, he started yelling at me, saying he hated modern women like me who flaunt their careers. According to him, Lily was a much better woman because all she wanted was to get married and have children. Despite his yelling, I remained calm and reminded him that every woman has different needs. Lily clearly came from an affluent family and might not care as much about her career, but I valued mine. I told him that if he wanted a woman like Lily, he should be with her. I suggested we stop arguing, and that he could move out of the apartment whenever he was ready. His eyes widened, and he asked how I could afford to pay the rent on my own. I explained to him that I had received a raise in my salary, which meant I could now afford the entire rent without needing a roommate. Upon hearing this, Jake immediately began shouting, accusing me of trying to show off in front of him. He went on about how Lily was richer than me and even had her own house that her father had bought for her. He yelled at me, saying I needed to change and become more complacent. He sneered, claiming that at the end of the day, men only wanted a housewife, not a woman who earned more than them. I told him to shut up, tired of arguing with him in the middle of the night. I told him he had until the end of the month to move out and that until then, he could sleep on the couch. I could hear him grumbling, but I ignored him and went back to sleep. Thankfully, over the next week, Jake started packing and moving his things out. I felt relieved, excited even, about the prospect of finally having the entire place to myself. On his last night, I came home to find Jake and Lily sitting on the couch. I stared at him, shocked, and he explained that since it was his final night at the apartment, he wanted to show Lily where he had lived. I couldn't believe his audacity, bringing another woman into our place without asking me, knowing I was due back. I didn't want to be rude to Lily, as this wasn't her fault, so I greeted her politely. To my surprise, She looked at me with obvious contempt and didn't even acknowledge my presence. I decided not to take it personally and went to freshen up. Later, while I was cooking pasta in the kitchen, Lily came in for some water. She stood there watching me for a minute, which made me feel awkward. I asked if she needed something, but she gave me the same contemptuous look. I chose to ignore her and kept cooking, planning to take my meal to the bedroom and eat in peace. After finishing, as I was about to head downstairs, I overheard their conversation. Lily was telling Jake how lucky he was to have upgraded himself after dating someone like me. I froze in shock when I heard Jake laughing and agreeing. Then, Lily asked him why he ever fell in love with me. That's when Jake's words completely shattered me. He confessed that he had used me because I was gullible enough to pay for our dates and lend him money when we were struggling. I felt a deep, stabbing hurt, but I didn't want them to see me like that. So, I quietly retreated upstairs, spending the rest of the night crying into my pillow. The next morning, when I woke up, Jake and Lily were gone. He had taken the last of his things and officially moved out. As I walked around the house, I felt a strange sense of freedom. I could not describe the lightness I felt, knowing he was finally gone from my life and from this place. I cried tears of joy, realizing how much better life would be without him. Though there was a slight pang of sadness for how Jake had used me all those years, I recognized that I would never have been truly happy with him. I was pleased that he had found someone who could make him happy. Later that night, when I checked my mailbox, I found an unexpected wedding invitation. My eyes widened in shock as I realized it was from Jake and Lily. I thought for a moment that maybe it was a mistake, or perhaps Jake was inviting me to make amends. But as the years of anger and frustration I had bottled up came rushing back, I knew what I had to do. I arved yes, with a +1, and a plan began to form in my mind. I was determined to make Jake regret ever inviting me. I opened my laptop and started scrolling through Lily's social media profiles. I examined every single post she had shared over the years, and as luck would have it, I finally stumbled upon what I was looking for. Just 6 months ago, Lily was reaching out to Jake over the next few weeks. Jake opened up about how Lily had cheated on him multiple times, with the latest affair being with Chris. This was news to me, as I had no idea about this until then. Jake went on to explain that Lily had always been attracted to older men, so it didn't surprise him when she admitted she had fallen in love with Chris while they were still together. Needless to say, their breakup had been messy, and Lily had been blocked from his life ever since. Still, I felt excitement bubbling inside me, thinking about the look on Jake's and Lily's faces when they saw me at the wedding with my special guest. On the day of the wedding, as expected, Chris's eyes widened when he saw me walking in with Jake. He must have recognized Jake as Lily's ex immediately. We ignored his gaze and pretended to be nonchalant as we made our way to our seats. Chris came up to me and through gritted teeth, angrily whispered, asking what I was doing here with Lily's ex. I simply smiled and reminded him that it wasn't the place to make a scene. When Lily noticed Jake seated next to me, she froze, confusion written all over her face. She turned to look at me, then at Jake, before asking him what he was doing with me. I smiled and told her I had invited him as a guest to show our support for her marriage. Lily's face turned a deep shade of red, and she demanded to know if Jake and I were dating now. Jake remained silent. It was such a ridiculous question that it didn't even deserve a response. The tension in the room built up, and Lily asked Jake if they could speak privately. Chris began to look concerned and called for a bridesmaid to check on Lily. A minute later, the bridesmaid returned, holding a note in her hands, and announced to everyone that Lily had run away with her ex-boyfriend. The guests stood in shocked silence as the bridesmaid continued to read aloud a note where Lily admitted that seeing Jake had revived her old feelings for him. She confessed that she had made a huge mistake marrying Chris. The revelation left the guests in stunned silence, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction that Chris's plan to humiliate me had backfired. What was meant to be a celebration of his victory over me had become the stage for his own downfall. It felt incredibly satisfying to know that I had played a part in turning his day upside down. Since sharing my story, I've received mixed reactions to my post. A lot of people agree that I did the right thing, but some think I might have gone too far. I want to clarify that it was when he replies update 2. Jake reached out to me yesterday, sending a long text expressing how grateful he was for me taking him to the wedding. He mentioned that he and Lily had gone on the honeymoon that she was originally supposed to take with Chris. They had spoken to her parents because they were genuinely worried about her. Jake told me he would be meeting with me soon to clarify everything in person. In the meantime, Chris had been trying to reach me non-stop since the wedding. I had informed him that he wasn't welcome at my house, and he could say whatever he wanted to me while standing outside my door. Chris started shouting, accusing me of completely ruining his life. Apparently, he had already handed in his resignation at work, thinking he'd never need to go back after marrying someone as wealthy as Lily. He angrily demanded to know why I brought Jake to their wedding. At that moment, I could feel my temper rising. I decided to tell him exactly what was going on, especially the part where he had claimed he was going to live a life of luxury with Lily. That was the last straw. I told him that he had no right to come to my house and yell at me for something that wasn't my fault. Lily was an adult who chose to leave him, and he needed to direct his anger at her. He fired back, claiming it wasn't his fault that I had been so naive, not realizing how he had been using me all those years, and that I shouldn't be punishing him for the past. I scoffed, took a few steps back, and told him not to overreact. As he was going to leave now, I shut the door firmly, telling myself this was the last time I'd ever see him. Since then, I've blocked him from everywhere and informed my family about what happened. I'm planning to change the locks on my house and install a security camera on the door. That way, the next time he tries something, I'll have it on record to file a formal complaint. It's been a month since the last update. I hadn't heard much from Lily, but Jake assured me that she was here just to apologize. Lily was clearly remorseful as she profusely apologized for how she had treated me in the past. Then, she went on to tell me her side of things with Chris. She shared how Chris had always been kind to her at work, giving her plenty of attention during their long shifts together. She revealed that he would often complain about me, saying how unhappy he was in our relationship and that he wished he had been more honest with her earlier. Eventually, this led to their breakup. Lily then explained how she had believed she could be happy with Chris, despite their apparent age difference. She confessed that when she saw me, she felt insecure about how independent I was. It made her jealous that I didn't seem to need a man to take care of me. She apologized for hurting my feelings, and I could sense the regret in her voice. I understood where she was coming from, and I shared with her how hard I had worked my entire life to reach the position I held at work. Lily nodded solemnly, her eyes downcast. I could tell she was reflecting on her actions. She explained that she had spoken with her parents about the situation, and although they had been furious at first, they had ultimately decided to support her decision. She planned to file for an annulment with Chris soon. Hearing this, while it didn't entirely sit right with me, I felt a certain sense of satisfaction that at least two people had found happiness after all the chaos. I could see the love between Lily and Jake, and in that moment, it was clear that they had found peace with each other.